Welcome to everybody. My name is Ingrid Kutsia and I'm the Senior Program Manager of Biodiversity and Nature-Based Solutions here at ICLEI Africa. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all, both the attendees and speakers, on behalf of ICLEI Africa, ICLEI Cities Biodiversity Center and the World Urban Parks, to our webinar this afternoon, which is being organized in partnership between ICLEI and World Urban Parks. This webinar, it's part of the regional roundtable series, and we're going to be focusing on urban parks, urban futures, insights from Africa. And we're particularly excited about this webinar because it's part of a global series of webinars, and it leads up to the Global World Urban Parks virtual conference, which is taking place later in November this year. Our webinar today is an opportunity for African cities to discuss social constructs and catalytic interventions relating to open space and parks within our cities in order to deal with the challenge or to challenge the status quo regarding urban landscapes, particularly that COVID-19 has brought to the forefront in Africa. And we're going to be focusing on three main questions during our panel discussion. We certainly hope that this webinar will contribute to further innovation in relation to building greener cities in Africa that are fit for the future post-COVID urban landscape. So this afternoon, and if you can take me to the next slide, please, I'm very pleased to welcome a really great lineup of speakers. Some of them have been here already. My next slide, please, Ryan. We today have Bishop Ngobeli from World Urban Parks, Isaac Mgumbule, who's from Kampala and has joined us in the past. I'm very happy to have Abdon Mupunda from Ilala, from the city of Dar es Salaam, which is a city very close to my heart. And then also very excited to have Ayanda Roji from the city of Joburg. And just very quickly, before we go on to the next slide, I thought I would just give some basic house rules. Firstly, you will notice as participants that you are muted and your video cameras are turned off. The second point that I need to make is that we are recording this webinar, and by participating, that means you do give consent to be recording. The third point, just to say, is that we will have time for questions. So if you would like to ask a question, I invite you to please enter it into the Q&A box. You will find at the bottom of your screen that there's a little tab that says Q&A. Please write it in there. We have people who are going to be monitoring those questions. We've also asked the speakers to keep an eye on the questions. And if there's a specific question that you would like to ask one of our speakers, just write their name down so that they know that it's directed at them. We're going to try our best to answer as many of our questions as we possibly can. And then the last thing that I want to just invite everybody is to say, keep your eye open on the chat box also, because this is where we load up the bios of our speakers. And this is also where we're going to be putting in links. Many of the interesting projects and initiatives that we're going to hear about this afternoon, we've been provided with links and we will include it in there. And if you can just take me to the next slide, please. I just quickly want to run through our program. I'm about to hand over to Bishop, who's going to talk to us about the World Urban Parks and basically just set the scene for our webinar this afternoon and why this is such an important webinar. Then we have our three city speakers who are going to present on urban parks in their respective cities. You'll see there we have Kampala, we have Ilala municipality, which is one of the 5 district municipalities in Dar es Salaam city, and finally the city of Joburg. And once those presentations are completed, we will open our panel discussion. And then I will just close it with a few very short closing remarks. And at this stage, it is my great pleasure to introduce to you our first speaker, Bishop Ngobeli. He's a board member of the Emerging Cities Chair of World Urban Park. is somebody that we have a very special relationship with, because ICLEI and the World Urban Parks do have a partnership. And without any further ado, Bishop, I am handing over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ingrid. Good afternoon. It's good to be here. And yeah, my name is Bishop. I'm from Johannesburg City Parks and Zoo, and I am a president of the Institute of Environment and Recreation in South Africa, and I'm the member of World Urban Parks as a board member. My next slide, please. Yes, that's the introduction. Next slide, please. What is World Urban Parks? Everyone they ask themselves that very same question. What is World Urban Parks? What are they here to do? What are they from? World Urban Parks is an organization that manages parks and all over the world. And our vision is a world where people value and have easy access to quality urban parks, open spaces, and recreation. That's what we would love to do. We'd love everyone all over the world, whether you are in Nigeria, whether you are in Uganda, whether you are in South Africa, you are in Mexico, Singapore, everyone should have an access to quality urban parks, even also looking at spaces that are in the rural area, most especially in our country, South Africa, we've got rural areas. So we'd love to create a network with people so that we can be able to create urban parks that are quality for everyone, and so that we can be able to connect. Our mission is to promote and support the provision, effective management, and use of urban parks, open space recreation worldwide. So this is not a South African context or African context, but it's a worldwide. But for today, in our webinar, we are talking about open space in Africa, open space in our respective countries. How do we make sure that we have got quality open spaces in our country? So that's what we're looking at. How do we connect? How do we connect with ICLEI, Africa, and also World Urban Parks to make sure that we've got quality urban spaces in Africa? Next slide, please. What we do at World Urban Parks is three things. We advocate about parks, we advocate about open spaces, quality open spaces for all, and also with best practices. What happens in South Africa should not be something different that happens in Singapore or something that happens in Japan, in Tokyo. We must be looking at same best practices. If we are providing open spaces for people, should be able to say what are the best practices, which are the best standards that we are using, what are the best measures that we can be able to measure these spaces, so that we don't have different standards all over the world, but we've got one standard that will be able to say this is how we value our spaces. The other one is collaboration. This webinar today is about World Urban Parks collaborating with ICLEI Africa. How do you collaborate with other institutions? How do you collaborate with City Parks Alliance in the US? Parks into Australia, Parks and Leisure Australia, IRM in South Africa. Those are the reasons why we are here. We want to collaborate with different organizations so that we can be able to provide good quality spaces for all. Not into others who say, but should I join urban parks? Should I join? Yes, we are one family. We collaborate with each other. We work together hand in hand. Some of the documents we get from the other institutions. So we work together so that we collaborate and make greener spaces and open spaces for all being better for everyone. Next slide, please. Our regions, we've got various regions. One is Asia Pacific region, where it caters the Asian countries. We've got the European region, Northern region. But today, our region is called Emerging Cities region, which contains Africa, your Mexican. But now the Mexican, they are working on their own because of the language barrier. But the Emerging Cities that's our region in Africa, where we'll be looking at how do we make sure that cities in Africa start collaborating with everyone so that we can start talking. This morning, actually before this webinar, we had a chat with my good friend from Kampala. I said, how are you managing parks in Kampala? How are you doing things in Kampala? So this region, the emerging cities, which caters more Africa, that's the region that most of the African regions should be able to affiliate to, so that we can be able to start sharing knowledge, collaborating, talk about the best practices together with ICLEI, together with the Cities with Nature, so that we can be able to have quality spaces for everyone. Next slide, please. Well-urban parks, ICLEI Africa, City of our partnership started this year in May 2020, where well-urban parks becomes a supporting partner to Cities with Nature, so that we can be able to hold hands in hands, rather than someone do something on the other side, someone do something on the other side, so that we can start to hold hands and say, let's have a clear message that goes to our communities, that goes to our cities, that goes to our countries, to say, how do we make sure that we put best practices in terms of open space management, urban parks management, nature management in the world. But this one is looking at Africa. How do we make sure that Africa's spaces are preserved? Because you know, and everyone knows, that we are losing spaces in Africa every single day. If we don't do anything about preserving spaces, these spaces in Africa, we'll wake up one day not having spaces. Some of them, they are sitting now in private hands that government cannot be able to get. So that's where we are started. Let's collaborate. We are having this roundtable all over the world, so that we can be able to put all this information to what is it that we need in Africa, what is it that we need in North America, what do we need in Europe, what do we need in Oceania, so that we can be able to collaborate all this information. And each roundtable that we have, we address three main questions: challenges, innovation management, opportunities, or these urban parks, particularly during this type of global pandemic. COVID-19 has changed the way we develop spaces, has changed the way we look at spaces. Now it's an opportunity for us to say, let's collaborate, let's talk about this, so that we can be able to build or develop spaces for the future, which if it happens, there's then another pandemic, but we know that our spaces, we are ready. If you look at countries like South Africa, during the lockdown, we were unable to utilize the spaces. We are unable to go to all these open spaces, unable to go to our national parks, unable to go to our parks. But if we start looking at developing spaces for the future, spaces that when there's a pandemic or when there's any catastrophe, we'll be able to use them. People have asked us at well-urban parks a very good question to say, in Africa, your spaces are closed, but in other countries, spaces and open spaces or parks are open. Why is that? And we're able to say how we design our open spaces in Africa, how we preserve land available for open space management. We should really look at that, so that someone can be able to walk from this community to another community, so that we can be able to recreate. So those are the things that we should look at, innovation into the spaces for the future. And after we have talked about all these three questions, then the outcomes of this will be discussed in a congress in Tirana in November 2020, where we'll be able to say, this is what's coming from Africa, this is what's coming from Europe, North America, Oceania. What is it that is commonality? Is there anything different? How do we do things different? So those are the things that we're going to be doing. Next slide, please. That's our virtual the well-urban parks virtual congress, which is hosted by City of Tirana in November 2020. Here's the link that you should be able to register on that link. Be part of the congress. In that congress, we'll be talking about the findings that ICLEI has and well-urban parks collaborated to say, what is it that is happening in different countries? Those three questions, we'll be able to unpack them there to say, these are the new setup that we need to do. These are the new angle that we need to look at when we develop parks. So these are very important. Please register to this Congress, come over and in our virtual Congress so that we talk about these issues. And it's an opportunity for us as Africa to say, how do we move public open space? How do we manage public open space for the future in Africa? Looking at the pandemic, how do we do things differently? We've been developing parks in Johannesburg. We've been developing parks in Cape Town, Durban, Kampala, Uganda, all these countries. But it's an opportunity for us to go and say, how do we develop spaces for the future? How do we conserve the spaces for the future? Next slide, please. Those are the things that we parks for all. In most of the areas that we have in Africa, parks are meant for kids. When a kid is making noises, go play in the park, go play in the park. We have seen now with COVID, where people were sitting at home, they couldn't access these spaces. They realized these spaces are not only for kids, but these spaces are for all. These spaces are not for the swings. These are the spaces that you can take a book, you can walk your dog, you can walk with your friend, you can have a picnic. We have seen that all this with this pandemic. So we will be sitting in that Congress or in a virtual Congress where we'll be talking about this. How do we make sure that we build parks for all, we build into quality parks for all, so that people can be able to utilize those parks. Next slide, please. The biggest challenge and that we have, and that's what we put, we need more collaboration of various organizations to conserve and preserve into spaces in Africa. We urge you municipalities, we urge cities in Africa to say, come on board, come on board with Wild Urban Parks, ICLEI Africa and Cities with Nature, so that we can be able to say, how do we assist you in terms of preserving and conserving your space in Africa? We cannot do it alone as three organizations, but we cannot do it with the assistance from you as municipalities, you as countries, to say we have got open spaces, we've got public open spaces, we've got urban parks in our area. We are here. Please work with us. Let's collaborate. Let's put best practices. Let's advocate of what we do, so that we can be able to create an amazing open spaces for all, quality open spaces for all in Africa. That's the message that we're sending today. If you are developing spaces in Africa, please give us an information. We'll get in touch with you and we'll see how we can do it. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. These are my contacts, my email address and my contact number. Please get in touch with us. Wild Urban Parks in Africa will be able to tell us where you are, how do you want to collaborate, so that we build an amazing spaces for all in Africa. I think next year or in the next few years, when we have another webinar again, we're going to be able to say from this day, how many urban spaces have you developed? How many spaces have you now acquired, so that we can be able to develop and create good quality spaces for all? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Bishop. Your passion really inspires all of us. And now, thank you. If you can just pass on to the next slide, please, Ryan. It's my great pleasure to introduce to everybody Isaac Ngumbule, he's the head of landscaping at Kampala, capital city. Thank you, Isaac. Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ingrid. My name is Isaac from the city of Kampala. I think, yeah, Uganda is the pearl of Africa. So when you look right at the center of Africa, you'll see Uganda. Okay, next slide. Yeah, it's a bit of my details. The next one. Yeah, so Kampala currently, as a city, covers approximately 189 square kilometers. However, as you can see from the map, that part of that land, part of Kampala, is within lake. So the land area isn't further reduced to approximately 176 square kilometers. And I think it's one of the cities, the very few cities that are closest to a lake. And Lake Victoria being the largest lake in Africa. Now, part of that 176 square kilometers, we did an estimate and we think we have approximately 26 26 square kilometers of vacant parks and road reserves. Now, when you further break that down to urban parks, we only have 10 hectares, which is 0.04%. Now, for a capital city to have that very little space as urban parks leaves a lot wanting. And we currently are working towards figuring out how we can acquire more land and develop more of these urban spaces. But as urban areas, we do face the pressures of development. And as such, the priority for urban parks is not seen and appreciated. We also face the challenge of land tenure system in Kampala, actually in Uganda as a whole, because unlike other cities where the government owns the bulk of the land, in Uganda, majority of the land is privately owned and it's under that customary tenure system. Now, as if we are to acquire more of these spaces and develop them into parks, then there's a need for dialogue between the private owners and the government to figure out a win-win situation where we can win by creating these urban spaces and the privates be able to generate income from preserving these spaces as urban parks. Next slide. So the next slide now, I want to show you some of the parks that we have. We have two major parks in Kampala. One is the Jubilee Park that's currently called the Sheraton Gardens. Now this is right next to the Sheraton Hotel, Kampala. This land, lucky enough, is under lease. It's owned by the government, but we signed a lease to Sheraton Hotel, Kampala to privately manage this park on the city's behalf. So part of what has enabled this space to remain as it is because we had an arrangement with a private organization to manage and maintain this space, but we set the terms and conditions to ensure that this is not, they don't develop anything within this park, but keep it as a green park for the city. The requirement from the private sector was to have a controlled access. So most of people that have visited Kampala would find that this space is actually ring fenced, and actually from Bishop's also presentation, he highlighted that majority of parks in Africa are almost ring fenced and not openly accessed. So the access is controlled in a way for people to kind of regulate who comes in and out of the space, but you're not required to pay anything to access the park. The second slide, the next slide. So then this is the second one, and it's the Constitutional Square. And this, ideally, it's next to the High Court of Uganda. So hence the name, the Constitutional Square. This too is a leasehold, but we as a local authority are currently managing this space. It's open access, so people can freely walk in and out. You transition through the space as you're walking. As you can see from the lower side, you can see a lot of taxis. Now it's right next to a transport terminal. And the majority, those are 14 passenger vans that are key means of transport within the city. Now, having such services next to the park does allow the public to actually interact and see these spaces. So we don't have the park secluded and hidden away from the public eye. But whenever somebody jumps off the public transport, they need to rest, they can walk up to the park. If we need to hold events in such spaces, they can easily find where these spaces are. And we have also found these places actually acting as iconic landmarks within the city, that if somebody tries to identify where they are, they can easily tell that we're next to the Constitutional Square, and they can easily find you. So there's a benefit to having such large spaces that they act as landmarks within an urban area. The next slide. So we then did a pilot project. Because we're faced with the pressures of land ownership, we then, as a city, then proposed looking at some of these large road reserves that have been left within the city center. So in 2014, we developed what we call almost an urban park. It's a small area, but right within the middle of traffic. So you have traffic on the left and the right, but this is a large reserve that we were trying to see how can we transform such spaces as opposed to just planting trees in them. Can people actually sit and enjoy them? And as you can see from 2020, that's what this space currently looks like, that people actually take time to sit under the shade of these trees, see traffic traversing to and fro. However, we faced challenges with our engineers because they claim that such a space, because of its attractiveness, also forces the motorists to slow down. So hence they find it causes a slow movement in traffic because people are trying to pause and see what the space looks like. So in the beginning, 2014, when we opened, I think that place was almost impassable for the vehicular traffic, but the pedestrian traffic actually appreciated such a space. Next slide. Yes, so now, having understood the challenges we face in Kampala, we also realized our legislation was lacking because these spaces that I've showed you actually didn't have actual legislation that identifies them as key spaces within the city. So we set about developing an ordinance that will guide the creation of more of such spaces. Now, this also sets, I think Bishop did talk about the quality of such spaces. So we set standards, minimum requirements, looking at tree coverage, sanitary facilities, parking for vehicles, accessibility in terms of persons with disabilities, waste collection, lighting, both day and night to ensure safety at all times. So this ordinance is currently on its second reading and hopefully will be passed into the third reading. And what we'll hope from this, once we pass this ordinance, that other new cities that have come on board can borrow this ordinance and actually transform it to use it as their own ordinance. Yeah, Ingrid, I'm about to finish. We then look at the activities. Next slide. Currently in Kampala, we have the permitted activities that are listed and the activities that are prohibited. Now, the challenge we've had with COVID is that it has forced a restriction on the number of members that can actually access such spaces. So the persons have been reduced. Social distancing is mandatory. Curfew is actually at 9 p.m. so people can't stay there till late. And then obviously my last slide, can move on to the next, the very last one. So the last one talks about the challenge that we face, the multi-land tenure system, the urban sprawl that currently fights for such spaces, the inadequate legislation, development pressures, and inadequate physical planning standards that we need to, I like what Bishop said earlier on in our private conversation. He said that urban parks are part of city infrastructure and not a reserve for other infrastructure. So we need to appreciate that these are actually key elements of the urban infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Isaac, and I'm sorry we had to rush you. It's just so interesting. In fact, all the presentations so far have been interesting. And just to alert both the speakers and the attendees, we're getting a lot of questions. There's clearly a lot of interest. So we are going to run probably 15 minutes over time, just so that we can afford the speakers a good time to do their presentations and also to respond to the questions coming up. And with this, I'm going to introduce our next speaker all the way from Dar es Salaam, Abdun Mapunda, who's the head of Department of Environmental Conservation and Solid Waste Management in Ilala Municipal Council. Thank you, Abdun. Abdun, if you can just unmute yourself, please. Thank you.
Are you hearing me now?
Yes, now we can hear you. You can go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Mr. Abdul Mapunda. I'm head of Department of Environment and Solid Waste Management from Tanzania, Ilala Municipal Council. I'm from Tanzania. To present my presentation, which looks on 3 areas: how parks are used and managed in Ilala Municipal Council, the importance of it, and the role of park in the life of the city, challenges and the future plans regarding the urban parks. As you know, Tanzania is one of the sub-Saharan country enriched with the natural resources, game reserves, national park, and one beach located in the urban and the rural areas. However, Many things are not documented in our literatures, but there is a recreational ecosystem services, and also recreation services and recreational places in Dar es Salaam city. Ilala is among the municipal in Dar es Salaam city. Others are Kinondoni, Temeke, Ubungo, and Kigamboni. But the responsibility of this management of parks is belonging to local government and under the Department of Environment, Conservation and Solid Waste Management. The responsibility of making sure that these urban parks are managed is under the municipal itself, but also there is a private sector who are engaging in a PPP mode to manage these parks. There is a role of urban parks. Role of urban parks are played in the life of the city. So there is one is improving the community health, that is creating recreation areas where people can do exercise and also they can relax and enjoy the beaches and the other open spaces. Also reduce the vulnerability of climate change impacts. Not only that, also amelioration of climate. Also act as a disaster management areas. That means evacuation area where in case of any disaster in the city where people they can evacuate and restore for some time. Also act as a exhibition facility where people can show their different businesses in the parks, and also do some meetings, a religious meeting, even the politics who are using these parks. Also act as a conservation of the area where plant species are reserved. People that can go for environmental studies and also spread of learning and knowledge. Not only that, but also there is some challenges on that. On the future and the future plans regarding the urban parks. We have a challenge of budgetary constraint. If we want to maintain these parks, we need to have enough budget to make a service, maintain and develop the new parks. That's why we are trying to adopt the PPP mode, where to engage the private sectors on managing these parks. Also, the human economic activities is one of the biggest challenges, because some people, they are using these parks to make a garage, to make a service for their cars and everything, so that's very, very difficult to control them. Also food vendors, there is a small pet businesses, Mama Lishe and Baba Lishe, and the one who is selling the food to the people. And also some people, if there is no law enforcement, the country work can go that areas. So, economic activity is a very biggest problem. Illegal land use encroachment on green spaces, always human settlement and horticulture activities, they're trying to encroach these areas. If we don't have enforcement enough, so all the open spaces can be encroached. Lack of awareness. This is a very big problem, because some people, they don't know the importance of recreation areas, recreation spaces and urban areas. In the urban areas, they think that maybe the open spaces and the urban park, they can use for doing other things, or they misuse, they mistreat them. So we need more awareness to the community so that they can understand what the importance of it. Lack of enforcement and low priority for green parks. Sometimes some people, they don't know, actually lack of awareness, it creates some difficult to enforce. So if there is lack of enforcement, the urban encroachment will increase. Also, there is inadequate technical personnel. This is also, we need more people, technocrats, on managing these parks. What is our future plan regarding urban park? To increase the budget so that we make good management for that. Engaging a private sector under PPP mode, because, for example, NBCs, these banks, mobile phone companies, and the other, if they engage more, they can provide that CSR, corporate social responsibility. They can get it to manage these parks. Not only that, but also municipal are preparing a title deed for urban parks. You know, some urban parks, they don't have title deeds, so we are trying as much as we can so that every urban park should have a title deed, so that to reduce the encroachment for that. Also, we have a DMDP project and World Bank. This is Dar es Salaam Metropolitan Development Project, where they can create a big park, such as in Chafukoga Ward Park in the Ilala municipality. Not only that, but also we have Msimbazi Valley, the flood-prone area. We are trying to upgrade Msimbazi Valley so that to have a big city park, that to provide recreation areas, flood buffer zone, and other development activities, so that you can use for that. So in generally, the problems and our future plans are more or less the same in most African countries. Thank you very much for listening.
Abdul, thank you so much. You've really given us a very good indication of what's happening in Ilala municipality in Dar es Salaam. And I am now at the point where I'm going to hand over to our last speaker, Ayanda Roji from the city of Joburg. She's the head of research and knowledge management, and she's at Joburg Parks and Zoo Agency. Thank you, Ayanda.
Thank you so much, Ingrid. Good afternoon, everyone. Next slide, please. And next one, please. I think by way of background, Johannesburg City Parks and Zoo mandate is to develop, maintain, and conserve green spaces that are within the jurisdiction of the city of Johannesburg. So these range from parks, nature reserves, cemeteries, and the boat gardens, and also the zoo. Next slide, please. I think just to give a context in terms of the city of Johannesburg, like the rest of other cities in South Africa, it is a post-apartheid city, meaning that it continues to grapple with or to attempt to break the back of the twisted spatial inheritance from not just apartheid, but from colonial policies and everything that goes with that. And we know that that includes dispersed human settlements. It includes racial segregation. It includes land use separation, that fractured built environment in South African cities. And the consequences are wide ranging. And one of them is the unequal access to public spaces. So the image on the left is Time magazine, they published last year. It really shows that you can have two communities in South African cities living side by side, but living very different lives. So it shows stark inequality economically, but also in terms of greenery. So I won't dwell much on this, but except to say there's a link that I provided on a recent study that is called Green Apartheid. It's been published now under COVID. Next slide, please. So the study is important for municipalities in the sense that we lack data. Yes, it has some discrepancies in terms of lexicon used related to typology of public spaces and boundaries that do not talk to our own boundaries. But as we know, as we can see, COVID really exposed us that the past is still with us, it works with us. So it's a good resource for municipalities. So in terms of the study, really, it shows who has access to public open spaces, who has access to what kind of public open spaces in terms of quality, but also how public spaces are distributed in South Africa. So I think 2 points for me is the role of public space or public open spaces in terms of spatial transformation. And also maybe we need to rethink our public open spaces with inequality in mind going forward. Next slide, please. So what did we do as the city of Johannesburg in trying to redress this deficit? since 1994, the city made huge strides, really in trying to redress the imbalances of the past. I'll mention just two initiatives because of time. The first one is the 2010 World Cup. So over and above bidding for stadiums, we thought of going radical in terms of growing the city. We partnered with stakeholders, both state and non-state, and planted trees in Soweto, like 200,000 trees. And then over time, we developed parks in areas that were previously deprived, where there were no green spaces before, so that thereby improving the quality of life in those spaces, mainly Black communities. So the other initiative is the bold initiative by the City of Johannesburg that is called Corridors of Freedom. The initiative tried to restitch the city in terms of the affluent areas, previously white areas, and the poorer areas, previously Black and still Black communities. It did this by using a transport system to sort of link the city to ensure that people have access or live in close proximity to social amenities, but also to economic opportunities. What is wonderful about that initiative is that green spaces were at the core of that. So next slide, please. As we continuing with these wonderful initiatives, we are confronted with challenges, and my colleagues from other cities in Africa have already mentioned some of them, but I'll mention just a few. In African cities mainly, our work, green spaces, they are often viewed as an afterthought because of other competing needs related to basic services. And I think even in cases where we manage to like sort of marshal capital cost for investment, that becomes a sort of dead investment in the sense that over time, the infrastructure is often in a state of disrepair or neglect because we got the investment for capital development, but we've got limited funding associated with maintenance and management of those spaces. And that leads to spaces being unsafe or exclusionary. And it then distracts us from our goal, like vision of social cohesion, of like promoting social interaction in public open spaces. The other issue is the fact that we've got short political term of office. We've got city leaders that change every 5 years, meaning that priorities shift. One leader really, push public open spaces, the other doesn't. So the issue is that how do we embed the knowledge, the practices, in long-term decision making or strategies of the city. The third issue is around the fact that our work, by its very nature, you can't put a price tag on it, and that's the point I think from Kampala or from Dar es Salaam. The fact that a city council or our leaders sometimes they get seduced by investors in terms of these big developments, and then leave public open spaces aside. Silo mentality, I will talk about it in another slide, but one last point that I want to make is the importance of evidence base. We lack data in municipalities, we lack the capacity to collect data, but also I think is the fact that if you talk about data related to the kind of work that we have is difficult because it's resource intensive by nature in terms of collecting it. Yes, we can use satellite images or something like that, but we still need to know how spaces are being used and also the quality of spaces. So organizations like UN Habitat and also ICLEI, they've got technologies to help with mapping. So maybe it's one of the areas that we can sort of collaborate with. Next slide, please. So Johannesburg public spaces, because the city is cosmopolitan, it's rich in culture, it's rich in heritage, the spaces have like sort of various uses and experiences. Besides the plenty benefits that we know of providing ecosystem services like spaces that are like very important for physical health and mental well-being. In African cities, public spaces and green spaces, they have other meanings as well. So there are spaces for connecting with ancestors for other people. There are spaces for connecting with higher beings for other people. And also there are spaces for transferring intergenerational knowledge. In Johannesburg, for instance, they are popular for what we call stokvel, where women savings clubs and investment society, they gather, you know, in terms of distributing the profits and or the dividends. So sometimes these uses, they clutch and need to be resolved. The question is, do park managers have the skills necessary to convene and also to facilitate multi-stakeholder processes and mediate conflict, but also find common ground, develop necessary agreements, and so forth and so forth, is something that we need to take into account. Next slide, please. I'm wrapping up. So we've got key challenges, management challenges in some of the spaces, especially in inner cities, in African cities. Parks, they present a conundrum in the sense that they are green lungs for the city and they hold this huge potential. Let's take an example of kids. Public spaces where children live in concrete, they become stages for learning and for growing things and for seeing all of that. But at the same time, they present like they are double-edged sword in the sense that the pressing public issues, they get played out in the park, and then in turn they become unsafe. Next slide, please. So looking at everything that I've presented, the City of Johannesburg thought of new ways of doing things, new ways of collaborating as city departments ourselves, but also with communities. And knowing that we don't have or we lack capacity for facilitation, we partnered with a civil society organization, mainly to co-create public spaces from design to monitoring and evaluation. So using different methodologies, as you can see on the slide, that we've got Minecraft video game, we've got art workshops and so forth and so forth. The last one is about the need for integrated approach to cross-sectoral planning that is needed, because public open spaces in African cities are a responsibility of more than one department, meaning that as you are greening, you've got drugs, you've got homelessness, so you need other departments to play their role, meaning that you need to work together. And the last one is activation. The fact that you can't develop and live, but you must use the very same thing that the community is passionate about, or the strength of the community, so that you can use that for ownership. Last slide is about youth. I'm not saying anything, but just to say Africa has got a very youthful population. How to integrate that and mainstream our work so that young people are part and parcel of conservation programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayanda. That was also really, really inspiring. So we're going to move over to the panel discussion now. I see there's been a lively flow of questions, and thank you to the speakers that have responded. There's one or two that are still unanswered, but I'm going to include them now. And what I'm going to do in the remaining time is I'm going to ask just one of the questions to each of the speakers. And then I will get Bishop just to round off at the end. So the first question about the major challenges that the pandemic has created for urban parks and protected areas in and around African cities. I want to pose this to Isaac, seeing as how we rushed you at the end there. You were dealing with the challenges and you didn't really get an opportunity to go into that. So Isaac, if you would just maybe elaborate a little bit more on this question, specifically in terms of how you're dealing with the pandemic's challenges around parks in Kampala. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ingrid. So in regards to the challenges that the pandemic has created for urban parks, for Kampala, it has been mainly a restriction, first of all, on the number of people that are permitted to gather in such spaces. So the value of a park, especially in Kampala, has been that it has the ability to gather a large number of individuals and disseminate something, some sort of information or social gatherings. So by restricting the number of people that can actually access the spaces, people have found themselves turning away and holding less gatherings, meeting community members. The other has also been the social distancing requirement that you can't find, I think when they find more than 2 people gathered in a particular space, then those are immediately dispersed. Then the chances of games that would actually be played within the parks that has restricted because games into that people are not using the parks or what the parks can actually offer them. So that's been changed. But the blessing has also been that I know we see the challenges, but the blessing also has been that because we have very few indoor spaces that can accommodate people, people have actually found themselves resorting to hold meetings. So meetings that would happen in the boardroom have actually been moved. For example, City Hall, where we work, actually being held outside in the gardens and not indoor as they normally would have been. So our city council authority actually now sits in the gardens as opposed to their main hall because the hall can't accommodate the social distancing requirements. Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, I think I've just had a problem with my mute button, so let me start again. Abdon, I'm going to ask you the second question around management and innovation and how Ilala Municipal Council has created new ways of managing parks, innovation, new partnerships, getting public support, awareness. And then there was a question also around how is Ilala Municipality promoting innovation for the development of city parks in Ilala? Thank you, Abdul.
Yeah, thank you, Ingrid. Yeah, in Ilala, we tried to involve many stakeholders in management of these parks. This includes the private sectors, as I said earlier, and also there is a mobile phone companies also involved to manage these parks. And we know that our municipal council have limited budget on that. We are trying to involve them so that they make sure that they are engaged fully to manage this park. And also this park can help them to promote their business also. You know, always they're trying to maintain and then put their small log there showing that this park is managed by a certain so-and-so company. So this is another new chance of we involve them to manage this park. What else you have asked me? Sorry.
No, that was basically that. And then specifically the innovations you talked about, and I think that's a very innovative concept that you have in Ilala is the Mzimbazi Riverway, that program that you have there. Maybe you could expand a little bit on that and how you
we have Mzimbazi Valley, the flood-prone area where it's causing most of the catastrophe of flood. But there is we got World Bank funds to make that, we upgrade that area. That means can be used as a recreation area and also can help to protect the buffer zone for the flood-prone area. So there is a long way from the uphill to the downward. They are trying to create a big the urban park for recreational purposes and also as a business center for that area. So this is a new innovation. But also we have a DMDP project, the biggest project we have, that is Dar es Salaam Metropolitan Development Program. That one is a very important for us. It tries to create the urban park in the city, so to increase more more parks in the city, and our roads also try to be managed. Not only that road, also the trench where the flood can go direct to the riverside. So this whole project promotes a lot the urban park in the country.
So Abdon, there's a follow-up question that deals with it's from Amir Mapungwe. From the question is that there's a need for cooperation with the private sector on the maintenance of parks in Dar es Salaam, considering the amount of people in Dar es Salaam and their impact to climate change. So he just wanted to know what Ilala municipality is doing on that.
Well, that means to corroborate this private sector to manage these open spaces. You mean that? Huh?
Yes, the maintenance, the keeping them up.
Yeah, you know, in Dar es Salaam we have almost a population of almost in Ilala itself we have a population almost 1.4 million people, and also there is a business vendors who are coming to the city daily. They are doing business here. But what we are doing is just to give these open spaces and the urban park to the private sector so that they can manage direct there, use it for business purposes. Instead, they can be used as a recreation area and a resting place, and where they can use direct for what is intended for. So the private sector are fully engaged in managing this, and what they are doing is just to take care fully and protect by putting their logs that is managed for someone, some companies like that.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask the next question on opportunities of Ayanda. And you know, you raised a lot of issues around transformation, inequality, and I think that the whole COVID pandemic has really exposed the inequalities in cities very sort of harshly. And so what I want to ask you is, from the City of Johannesburg's perspective, what are the opportunities moving forward in our post-COVID world regarding our new audiences? You talked about youth very briefly, and maybe now you can elaborate a little bit about that, but also partnerships, awareness, and management and support of urban parks in African cities.
Okay, thank you so much, Ingrid, for that question. I think one positive for us in terms of COVID-19 pandemic is that we saw NGOs that were previously fragmented coming together to form a social movement. So we want to leverage on that. And when we look at the proposals that are coming up at city parks, we see we have an initiative that is called Adopt a Park, because we've got resource constraints. So we're looking at partnerships to co-manage our public open spaces. So oftentimes we get people from affluent areas, you know, to want to partner with us. But after COVID, we see people from poorer areas wanting to partner with us in terms of co-managing the parks. So that is so encouraging. That's number one. And number two, in the inner city of Johannesburg, we see that there's an alliance that is being formed, which is called Park Alliance, and they want to work with city parks. That is so important because some of the issues that we raised in a number of cities in Africa, of the developments, massive developments, and public open spaces being seen as an afterthought, it clearly shows that you can't be left to our own devices. So we need active citizenship to help combat the loss of public space. So I spoke a lot about young people with no opportunities. And we all know that young people without opportunities is a recipe for disaster. So the City of Johannesburg during COVID has established a dedicated youth department within, I think, the mayor's office. So I think agencies like city parks need to be aggressive in terms of integrating our work as part of the programs of such departments. And the last one, I think, is innovation is also about the new way of doing things, the new way of thinking. We've got a strength in our industry So if we look at the opportunity of the situation of COVID, we've got people who are hungry, we've got food insecurity. But if you look at park agencies, we've got horticulturalists, we've got landscape architects. So in a situation or in African cities, we can't afford just to prune the trees or to beautify, meaning that we need to think beyond that and maybe have urban agriculture as an integral part of our public open spaces. This is not to mean that we want urban agriculture everywhere, because there is like some prerequisite, strong partnership with other state and non-state actors, but also co-management that should exist. So those are some of the reflections that we have within Johannesburg City Parks and Zoo. Thank you.
Thank you. And Bishop, before I hand over to you for some last remarks, I just want to ask Abdul, there's been another last question. You mentioned the, leasing parks to mobile phone companies. And the question is that, do you have any measures in place to make sure that conservation is a priority and that the phone companies don't use these areas just for business?
Actually, we have a plan before with them. We advertise this one through the magazine and the other media, and everyone tried to compete to get these parks. After getting, we enter into contract between we municipal and the private company or mobile phones. What we are supposed to do during getting these parks and how you're gonna manage them. So there is different ways on how doing this to come out with a good product, what we want, and how we look the park look like. It doesn't change from the previous meaning that the park should be used for the public, recreational area, and the relaxed area, and even the exercise area. Rather, they're just only for them to maintain and looking at the owner for that, but it's not belonging to them, it's belonging to municipal. It's just only taking them, it's just only for use, for that time to make a maintenance for that service and doing it like that way. So is the ownership of the parks is still remain to the municipal itself. But the private companies is just only to take a look at that, maintenance and service for that. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. And Bishop, I'm just going to give you the last word here. I'd like you to reflect on what we've heard today from Isaac in Kampala, from Abdul in Dar es Salaam, and from Ayanda in Joburg. And what do you think are the sort of things that stand out for you in terms of innovation coming from these cities that we would like to take to the international table and say, look what's happening in Africa, here's some amazing innovations and some of the opportunities that you heard this afternoon, please.
Thank you, Ingrid. It's amazing that some of the innovations that other countries are doing, the other countries have done them 3-4 years back. And that's the setup of collaboration where you work together. You don't have to go and reinvent the wheel. The information is there, the innovative part is there. Let's just take what another country has done or another city has done and put it into that country, customize it, because the cities are not the same, cities are different. We take what has been done in South Africa, for example. Other countries, they say they don't have sort of like a spread of how many parks they have. City of Joburg has done it. City of Cape Town has done it. City of eThekwini has done it. Some of the cities have done it. Let's go and say, how did you do it? So that we don't have to go back there and say and start from the scratch. The information is there. Let's do that. The other thing I've realized is the challenges that cities are facing are more or less the same challenges in Africa. Loss of open spaces or public open spaces in Africa it's one which is a very key challenge. And one thing that I think it stands out here, where some people were asking, define what is urban parks. What is urban parks? I think that's one thing that when we go into our Congress in Tirana, we should be able to unpack that. What is urban parks? Because in Europe, an urban park is being seen as this. In South Africa or in Dar es Salaam, it's seen as a different setup. So I think that's one thing that we should do. And also collaboration. I think the collaboration between ICLEI Africa, Urban Parks, and these other cities, I think it's very key for us to say, let's go and work together. Let's build more parks. And I'm so excited when I heard Mr. Maponga said they've got new parks that they're building. It's very encouraging that they are putting investment into building parks. Actually, building parks is not where we go and put strings and everything. You can build nature parks, create something that the community can be able to use and admire and utilize and make it safer. Other people say, no, let's go put strings, let's go put roundabout and everything. It's not about roundabout. It's about a space that can be used by anyone and very safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bishop. And Ryan, I'm going to ask you to just skip the next slide and take us to the end. We've come to the end of a really amazing webinar. I think that we've had not only a very lively discussion in the Q&A box, and I want to thank our speakers for responding to those so diligently, but we've also had a very interesting conversation around these challenges and the opportunities and the innovation and the maintenance and management of parks between our speakers. One of the things that I just want to point out, and I've asked my colleague Nikara just to put it in the chat box, is a link to what we call, and Abdon will know about this, the thematic atlas for Dar es Salaam. This is something that ICLEI has done for the city of Dar es Salaam. And Bishop, you made a comment in your presentation about, and Isaac also referred to it, about, you know, looking at open space as infrastructure and not as redundant space. And what this thematic atlas does is to look at what are the benefits of nature that we can use in cities? How can it help flood attenuation or heat island effect, etc.? So there's a useful resource and tool that can be replicated in cities. And I think what I need to do now is just to say thank you to all of our speakers. These are cities that are great friends of us, of ICLEI. We've worked in all of these 3 cities, and we have long-standing relationships, but also with the World Urban Park. So Bishop, thank you also for collaborating with us on this. We certainly are looking forward to the Global World Urban Parks virtual conference in November, and judging from the presentations today, I think we have some magnificent examples to show the rest of the world that there's great innovation and great solutions coming from Africa. And I invite you to register that. There is the link on that slide to the left. And on the right, I also just want to do a quick plug for the Local Climate Solutions Conference, which is coming up just before the World Urban Parks one. This is going to be taking place in the 3rd to the 12th of November. And I really encourage our African cities. We are joining forces with Kigali in terms of the organization of this. So I would really welcome you all to join that. And in this LOCS one, we are going to specifically also talk about the theme of finance. And I know that finance is an issue. All of you mentioned that, so it is something that's very relevant to all of us. And with those short remarks, I want to say thank you to everybody, especially the speakers, and also thank you to everybody who joined us. Thank you and goodbye. And as Bishop said, hope to see you at our next webinar.
Bye.
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 All right, bye. See you.